There's a Friday in October 2010 that almost nobody talks about, and it's the day Liverpool Football Club nearly stopped existing. I don't mean struggled, I mean administration, the insolvency process. The one that killed Bury and gutted Portsmouth and put Rangers in the 4th Division. Liverpool, 18 league titles, 5 European Cups, Shankly, Paisley, Dalglish, Rome and Rome again, and Istanbul. A loan repayment was due that day and the club couldn't make it. If it wasn't settled, Liverpool were going into administration with an automatic 9-point deduction. And they were 19th in the table at the time. Second from bottom in October, having taken 6 points from 7 games. 9 off 6 leaves you on -3 in the Premier League before Halloween. That's the bit people don't sit with. Nobody has ever come back from that. It wouldn't have been a difficult season, it would have been relegation, and then the wages become unpayable, and the good players go for nothing, and you're into the exact spiral I've covered on this channel 4 times already, with much smaller clubs. And the reason you probably don't remember any of this is that it didn't happen. The sale went through with hours to spare, and 10 years later they won the league, so the whole thing has quietly filed itself away as a bad couple of seasons under some unpopular Americans. It wasn't that. That week there was a hearing in the High Court in London, and then a second court order out of Texas that stopped everything dead, and for about a day nobody involved could tell you with any confidence what was going to happen to Liverpool Football Club. So let's do it properly. First, what was actually at stake, because the size of the drop depends on how high the thing was. Bill Shankly turned up in December 1959. Liverpool were in the 2nd Division at the time, and had been for 5 years, and the training ground at Melwood was in such a state that he described it as a wilderness. Weeds, broken fencing, a pitch you couldn't reliably play on. The story that gets told about his first weeks is that he spent them clearing it himself, with the coaching staff, by hand. Whether that's exactly how it went, the point of the story is right, which is that he didn't start with tactics. He started with the building. Subscribe now if you're not already. It's free, it takes a second, and it's the only reason I get to make these. What he built over the next 15 years wasn't a good team. Anyone can build a good team. He built a method, and then he built a room. The boot room at Anfield was, literally, the room where the boots were kept. It was small, and it smelled of leather, and it had crates for chairs. And the coaching staff sat in there after training every day for decades and talked about players. Bob Paisley, Joe Fagan, Ruben Bennett, Ronnie Moran. They kept notebooks, actual handwritten notebooks, on every player, every session, every injury, going back years. When Shankly retired in 1974, Liverpool didn't go looking for a manager. They promoted Paisley out of the boot room. When Paisley went in 1983, they promoted Fagan out of the boot room. It just carried on. Paisley won 6 league titles and 3 European Cups in 9 years, and remains statistically the most successful manager English football has ever produced. And most people under 40 couldn't pick him out of a photograph. 11 titles in 15 seasons. 4 European Cups between 1977 and 1984. Liverpool weren't a club that had good spells. They'd solved continuity, which is the single hardest problem in sport, and which almost nobody has ever managed before or since. Then they won the league in 1990, and didn't win it again for 30 years. Supporting Liverpool through the 90s and 2000s was a strange business. There was plenty of success, a cup treble in 2001, 3 trophies in 1 season. And then there was Istanbul, which I have to do properly, because it matters for what comes next. The 25th of May 2005, Champions League final against AC Milan, who at that point were probably the best assembled squad in world football. Maldini, Nesta, Cafu, Pirlo, Kaká, Shevchenko, Crespo. Maldini scored in the first minute, Crespo scored twice before half-time. 3-0, and it wasn't a flattering 3-0, it was a hammering, and the television cameras kept finding Liverpool supporters in the stands who had simply stopped watching. Then in 6 minutes, between the 54th and the 60th, Liverpool scored 3 goals. Gerrard headed one in. Smicer hit one from distance. Alonso missed a penalty and scored the rebound. 3-3, in a European Cup final, having been 3 down at the interval. It went to extra time, and in it Jerzy Dudek made a double save from Shevchenko from about 2 yards that he has never adequately explained, and neither has anybody else. Then penalties, and Dudek did the wobbly legs thing on the line that Bruce Grobbelaar had done for the same club 21 years earlier, and Liverpool won the European Cup for the 5th time. 5th, which under the rules of the day meant they kept the trophy permanently. Another final 2 years later in Athens, which they lost to the same opponents. So there was success, just never the one that mattered. And that gap between winning everything in Europe and never winning the league is what sets up the whole disaster. Because if you're the board of a club in that position, you don't conclude that things are fine. You conclude that you're one push away, and you go looking for someone to fund the push. Hit subscribe if you haven't. This is about to go somewhere very odd. And while that was going on, Manchester United were winning the league roughly whenever they felt like it, and pulling away financially, and the reason was mostly a building. Anfield held about 45,000, Old Trafford held 75. 30,000 seats, 19 home league games, plus the cups, plus European nights. Then the corporate boxes, worth several times a normal ticket. Then the sponsorship, which is priced off how many people you can get through a turnstile. A bigger ground doesn't earn you a bit more. It earns you enough more that you buy better players every summer, and better players win more, and winning more sells more shirts, and round it goes. Liverpool weren't behind because they were badly run. They were behind because of the size of a stadium, and everyone in the building knew that if they didn't fix it soon, the gap was going to become permanent. So they went looking for someone to build them a new one. That decision was correct. It's also what put the club in front of a judge 3 years later. And it very nearly went a completely different way, which is one of those details that gets lost. For months the frontrunner wasn't American at all. Dubai International Capital had been circling, talks were advanced, and at points in late 2006 it was being reported as effectively agreed. Then it wasn't. The Americans came in and the board went with them. I'm not going to tell you the other deal would have been better, because I've no idea, and neither does anybody else. But it's worth noticing that the entire thing you're about to hear turned on a boardroom preference in the winter of 2006, and that's usually how these stories start. Not with a villain. With a choice that looked fine at the time, and was made by people who were trying to do the right thing. February 2007, two Americans buy Liverpool Football Club, Tom Hicks, who owned a baseball team and an ice hockey team in Texas, George Gillette Jr., who owned an ice hockey team in Montreal. The deal valued the club a shade over £200 million and cost around $430 all in, debt included. And they said two things at the press conference, on camera, very clearly. The first was that this wasn't a leveraged deal. The club would not be carrying the money used to buy it. They were asked directly, because everyone in English football had watched what happened at Old Trafford 2 years earlier, and wanted to know if Liverpool was getting the same. The second was the stadium. Gillette said there'd be a spade in the ground at Stanley Park within 60 days. You can guess how both of those went. The borrowing ended up secured against the club through the holding companies, which is how a leveraged buyout works and always has. By 2010, the reported debt to the Royal Bank of Scotland and Wachovia was somewhere around 237 million, with interest running into the tens of millions a year. Money going in through the turnstiles was going straight back out to pay for the takeover. And Stanley Park stayed a park. Designs came out, plans got revised, costs went up, nothing was ever built. What curdled it wasn't the debt though, not at first. It was everything around the debt. Within about a year, the two of them were reported to be barely speaking. There were public rows about the manager. There was an approach to a different manager while Rafael Benitez was still doing the job, which came out and had to be apologised for. There was the email one of them sent to a supporter that ended up on the front pages. None of that nearly bankrupted anybody. But it's why the fanbase stopped extending any benefit of the doubt at all. And once a fanbase that size decides it's been had, you're not running a business anymore. You're under siege. And here's the cruel part. In the middle of all of it, Liverpool nearly won the league. 2008 to 2009 under Benitez. 86 points. 2 defeats all season, which is a total that wins you the title most years, and in fact would have won it in several of the seasons either side of it. Gerrard and Torres were both, that year, arguably the best in the world in their positions. Alonso was running the midfield. And there was a fortnight in the spring that Liverpool supporters still talk about, where they went to Old Trafford and beat Manchester United 4-1 on their own pitch, and then a few days later took Real Madrid apart 4-0 at Anfield. That is title-winning form. That is a team that has arrived. Second, a club that close has one obvious move, and every club in that position has made it since football began. Add 2 players, go again and finish the job, because you will not get a better run at it. Liverpool couldn't. The money was going somewhere else, and had been for 2 years. So instead of a squad being strengthened, you got a squad being quietly taken apart. Xabi Alonso, who had been the best midfielder in the league that season, went to Real Madrid that summer. He was not properly replaced. The player brought in to do it cost about half as much and was not the same standard, and everybody at the club knew it at the time. That is the exact moment the thing turns. Not the takeover in 2007, not the court case in 2010. The summer of 2009, when a club that had just finished second with 2 defeats sold its best midfielder and got worse. Quick one, and then we get to the courtroom. If you're enjoying this, subscribe. Costs nothing, takes a second, and it's the entire reason this channel exists. 7th the following year. No Champions League, which took a large chunk of income out at the exact moment the club could least afford it. Benitez left in the summer of 2010. Roy Hodgson came in, which went about as well as everyone now remembers. Torres, the best striker on the planet 18 months earlier, was visibly done and would be sold in January. First week of October 2010, 19th. By then the supporters had long since worked out what was going on, and what they did about it is a proper part of this story rather than background colour. In 2008 a group of them formed a union, not a fan club, not a forum, a union with a constitution and elected officers and membership fees called Spirit of Shankly. The specific reason it existed was the ownership. That was not a normal thing for English football supporters to do at the time. Fans complained, fans wrote letters, fans sang songs, fans did not generally incorporate, and it worked in the sense that mattered, which was that it made the ownership of Liverpool Football Club a story that mainstream journalists had to keep covering. There were marches through the city. There were banners at Anfield every week, some of them extremely pointed. There were protests outside the ground before kick-off and demonstrations at away games, and a sustained campaign aimed directly at the people the owners needed to keep happy. None of it was about results. It was about the debt, and about 2 promises made on camera in February 2007. If you're finding this interesting, subscribe. The part where the owners sue their own football club is next, and it's genuinely one of the strangest things that's ever happened to an English club. I want to be fair here, because it's easy to do the pantomime version of this, and it isn't accurate. Both men had run big sports franchises for years. Neither was a chancer who'd wandered in off the street. And the structure they used was completely lawful and gets used across business every week of the year. What they'd done was buy a football club the way you'd buy a manufacturer. And a football club isn't a manufacturer. A manufacturer that has a bad year makes fewer widgets. A football club that has a bad year doesn't qualify for Europe, and the money doesn't arrive. And there's no version of the plan where you simply try harder next quarter. That's the mistake, not greed, category error. Also, and this matters, the credit crunch landed about 18 months after they bought the place. Refinancing anything in 2008 and 2009 was a nightmare for everybody. Some of what went wrong here was 2 men misjudging a business they didn't fully understand, and some of it was the entire global banking system falling over on top of them. The owners wanted out by that point. The bank wanted paying. RBS had refinanced and set a hard date. The 15th of October. Repay or refinance or the bank could move, and what the bank moving meant in practice was administration. The board had been rebuilt for exactly this scenario. Martin Broughton brought in as an independent chairman with one job, sell the club, working with Christian Purslow and Ian Ayre. In early October that board accepted a bid of around $300 million from New England Sports Ventures, John W. Henry's group, who owned the Boston Red Sox. And that's the point it stopped being a takeover and became a lawsuit. Hicks and Gillett wouldn't have it. Their position was that the price undervalued the club and the board had no right to sell without them. So they moved to remove 2 directors and put their own people in, which would have handed them the vote. The board went to the High Court in London. Let me take you through the week properly, because it's 3 days and it moves fast. The board accepted the New England bid in the first week of October. The owners immediately said they wouldn't allow it and moved to replace the 2 directors who'd voted for it. The board said they had no power to do that. Neither side was going to give way, so it went to the High Court in London. On the 13th of October, the court ruled against the owners. The attempt to reconstitute the board was invalid. The sale could proceed. 2 days in hand before the bank's deadline. Done, apparently. Except within hours, a court in Dallas granted a temporary restraining order blocking the sale. Take a second with that. The ownership of Liverpool Football Club, 118 years old at the time, frozen by an order from a courtroom in Texas, roughly 24 hours before a deadline that would put it into administration. And this is the genuinely surreal part. There was now an English court saying the sale was valid and could go ahead, and a Texan court saying it couldn't. Two legal systems, 4,000 miles apart, giving opposite instructions about a football club in Merseyside. For most of the 14th of October, nobody involved could tell you how it was going to end. The board went back before the English court and asked it to order the owners to withdraw the Texas action, which is a thing English courts can do and don't do lately. The court agreed and took by all accounts a very dim view of the whole exercise. Late on the 14th, the Texas order came off. The sale completed on the 15th. Reporting at the time put it at hours before the deadline. The debt was repaid, there was no administration, no 9 points, and that weekend Liverpool played a game of football and most of the people watching had only the vaguest idea what had just been swerved. Comment with the club you want doing next. Most of the videos on here started life as somebody's comment. You know how the rest goes. The new owners weren't universally loved either, and there were serious rows in the years after about ticket prices and about a European breakaway league, both of which ended in fairly humiliating public retreats after the supporters made their feelings known. But the debt came off the club. Anfield got expanded instead of abandoned, which was the decision the previous lot spent 3 years not making. Champions League final in 2018, won it in 2019, league title in 2020, 30 years after the last one, which is precisely why this one's worth telling. Because what nearly killed Liverpool wasn't stupidity and it wasn't bad luck. It was the same machinery I keep running into on this channel. Someone bought a thing with money borrowed against the thing, and the thing then had to earn enough every single year to cover the cost of its own purchase. That works fine while the income holds up. Liverpool's income was colossal, and it still nearly didn't hold because they missed the Champions League once at the wrong moment and the margin vanished. That's the whole lesson. Everyone I've covered was betting on something continuing. RBS were betting asset prices kept climbing. Leeds were betting on finishing in the top 3. Portsmouth were betting one man kept writing cheques. Liverpool were betting on qualifying for the Champions League every year, forever, with no allowance for an off-season. And an off-season isn't a disappointment when you're built like that. It's a missed payment. This is the biggest club in England by history, with one of the largest supporter bases in the world, and it still came down to one afternoon, one bank, and a judge. If it can get that close to Liverpool, it can get to anyone. One last thing, and it's the bit I actually find interesting. The only reason any of this is public knowledge is the supporters. It was the marches and the banners and the union that turned an ownership dispute into a national story rather than something on page 4 of the business section. And it was that pressure that made selling the only way out. Football clubs don't have shareholders who reliably care. They have people who turn up every other Saturday for their entire lives. Turns out that's the only asset on the whole balance sheet nobody can borrow against. Subscribe, there's a new collapse on here every week. Next one's on screen now.